Martin Luther King Jr. said, "I choose to love. Hate is too great a burden to bear."
Lord, I lift your name on high. Lord, I love to sing your praises. I'm so glad you're in my life. I'm so glad you came to save us. You came from heaven to earth to show the way, from the earth to the cross, my debt to pay. From the cross to the grave, from the grave to the sky, Lord, I lift your name on high.
Hello and welcome to Lift, the Sunday night ministry of the Old Hickory Church of Christ, and we're delighted that you're with us. You know, we've been doing some house cleaning recently. One thing I've noticed is that sometimes you clean house and it just goes back to the way it was so quickly. To avoid that, what you have to do is not just rearrange things in your house, but you've got to get rid of some things so that everything has a place and everything is in its place. And there's some things we need to get rid of in our lives. We need to do some spring cleaning, and we need to get rid of some things. According to Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 31, you need to get rid of bitterness, and you need to get rid of wrath, and you need to get rid of anger. Those are the three topics we're discussing in our Lift ministry during the month of April. So last time we talked about bitterness, and maybe that's kind of like a low boil. But then wrath goes to medium, and anger is when things really get hotter. And there's a kind of internal agitation and progression that could be hinted at in Paul's words. So we have to take a look at our lives and be serious about controlling our mood and controlling our mouths. It all begins with bitterness, and then it moves to wrath. And that's our discussion today. And to think about that, I'd like for you to go with me to the book of Daniel in the 3rd chapter, where we see this progression taking place in the life of King Nebuchadnezzar of the Babylonians. It was supposed to be a very pleasant day, a day of worship, and it turned out to be a little hotter than usual, and we're going to take a look at how that unfolded. In the book of Daniel, in chapter 3, you remember, King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold. It was 60 cubits high, and its breadth was 6 cubits. He sets it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon, and he gathers all of the people's officials from these various provinces. It talks about the satraps, it talks about the prefects, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and the officials from all of the provinces are brought together. This is a big event. This isn't something that you do every day. And so Nebuchadnezzar put a lot of planning, a lot of thinking, a lot of money into this, and he wanted things to go well. The herald announced some instructions for them on that day. The herald proclaimed that you are commanded, peoples and nations and languages, that when you hear the orchestra, it mentions a number of different instruments specifically, but when you hear them playing, what are you supposed to do? You're to fall down and you're to worship the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Now, it's assumed that everybody's going to do that, but just to make sure there's no mistake, the herald adds that whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace. Well, there wasn't any mistake about what was expected that day. And so when the instruments played, the people bowed and they worshiped or pretended to worship, as the case may be. But there was an exception. We know that some Chaldeans come to Nebuchadnezzar with an accusation. It says they came maliciously. They weren't really interested in anything but seeing if they could hurt the reputations of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and get them pulled from their positions of influence so that others might have them, particularly because they were Jews, because they were foreigners. So these certain Chaldeans came forward, and they said to the king, "Oh, king, live forever." And then they started, "Didn't you issue a decree?" And they mentioned the decree that everybody, when they hear the music, they're supposed to bow down. "And didn't you also have a penalty if people didn't obey, that they would be thrown immediately into a fiery furnace?" Yes, and yes. Well, we need to tell you about some certain Jews who you have appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, these men, O king, pay no attention to you. And that's not exactly true. They were not disrespectful. They weren't trying to be defiant, but it was simply a matter of conscience. So it was not intended as disrespect to the king. They weren't flippant, but they were faithful. Well, they said they pay no attention to you. They don't serve your gods or worship the golden image that you've set up. And the latter is very true. They would not compromise their convictions. Well, it tells us King Nebuchadnezzar, in furious rage, commanded for the Jews to be brought to him. And so we see he's irritated. He's bitter, but maybe beyond bitter here. But he said to them, "Is it true? Did this really happen?" And he said to them, "Are you not serving this image that I set up?" But he gives them an out. He gives them a second chance. Now, if you are ready when you hear the sound of the horn, the pipe, the lyre, and he goes on, if you hear it, if you're ready to fall down, if you're ready to worship, well and good. But if you don't, you shall immediately be cast into the burning fiery furnace. By the way, who is there? Who is that God that will deliver you out of my hands? Well, he's a little bit presumptuous here, not realizing the true God of heaven and his amazing power. But you can see him cooling off. He's giving them a second chance. He expects that they're going to comply gratefully. But Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. We don't have to think about this. We know exactly what we're going to do." He says, "If this be so, that people who don't obey will be cast into a fiery furnace, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if not, even if he did not, be it known to you, O king, we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up." Now, something happens. Nebuchadnezzar goes from bitterness to wrath. He goes from one state to an increased state of agitation. Nebuchadnezzar was filled with fury. Previously said, in furious rage, he issued a command to them. And now it's talking about it consuming him, filled with fury. It says, in fact, that the expression of his face was changed. He was shocked. He wasn't used to anybody speaking to him like this. And so what did he do? He ordered the furnace to be heated 7 times hotter than usual. Now he got some of his mighty men to take care of casting the 3 Jews into the furnace. But the thing was so overheated that as they're opening the door, I guess, to cast them in, or whatever the arrangement was, that the blast of heat coming out killed the handlers. But when Nebuchadnezzar looks at what happens to the intended victims, he's shocked. The handlers are killed. The Jews are not overcome. They don't die. They're not hurt. They're walking around in the fire, and it's as if it looked to him like there was a fourth individual who he seems to call an angel after they come out, and he converses with them. Well, at first, he had them brought to him so that he could reprimand them. Now he has them brought out so that he can praise them. He said, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here. And they did. They came out of the fire. That fire had no power over them. And Nebuchadnezzar said, blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him. Even when they, set aside the king's commandment, yielded up their bodies rather than serve and worship any god except their own God. And so he makes a decree that no one should speak against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the Lord our God, and in fact promoted them in the province of Babylon. Wow. When you look at this story, it just reminds me, as I think about that fiery furnace, that there are times when we can become overheated, and we've got to be careful. Because Nebuchadnezzar, it didn't serve him well when he was overcome by his emotions. The things that he spoke, the things that he said, the things that he did could have ended his life and might have ended his life, but God was merciful to him. And people died because of his wrath. The handlers died. And he intended to kill Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Wrath does not work the righteousness of God. Wrath causes harm. It doesn't help. It creates any number of problems. It can poison our relationships, and it can corrode our mental attitude. It can create all kinds of difficulties and problems. And when we find ourselves being heated 7 times hotter than normal, what do we need to do? Well, if you're feeling a little hot in your house, what do? You go and you turn down the thermostat. And we need that spiritual ability to cool things off. What could you do? I mean, there's practical things. You might try breathing. Some people suggest that. Breathe a little deeper. When you're getting upset, you might find that you're not breathing. You might exercise, even going for a walk around the block. That might help you to cool off. Take a little time. Give yourself a little space, a little room. But I think there's more productive things that can be done. When you go to the book of Romans in chapter 12, it tells us about the dangers of wrath. And in fact, it mentions that wrath really is something that God can handle, but as humans, because of our sinfulness, because of the corruptness of our hearts, we need to be really, really careful. He says, as we look here in Romans chapter 12 and verse 19, beloved, never avenge yourselves, but leave it to the wrath of God. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. We can't handle this. So we've got to be really, really careful, because we allow ourselves to use that energy in a hurtful and in a harmful way. So he says, instead, we need to let love be genuine. He says in verse 17, repay no one evil for evil, but give thought to do what is honorable in the sight of all. Someone may do evil to you. Don't do evil to them. It's not that he's saying, well, you judge the circumstance and decide what. No, it may be evil. They may hurt you or hurt someone that you love. But don't become vindictive. Don't become vengeful, because it's not going to work the righteousness of God. So he says, if possible, so far as it depends upon you, live peaceably with all. So payback is not the way to live. Prayer is more in keeping with God's will. He says to the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. And so if we're trying to turn down the thermostat, what can we do? If you want to cool things off, say something nice, do something nice. Instead of becoming cruel, callous and cruel, instead become kinder. He ends by saying, do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Do you understand that? That when you're bitter and bitterness goes to wrath, your better nature is being overcome by sin and selfishness. And so you need to be on guard. And when you feel that happening, you go to that thermostat that controls your mood and your mouth, and you decide, I'm going to turn things down. You know, in the book of Proverbs, it says in chapter 15 and verse 1 that a soft answer turns away wrath. And I think not only the wrath of the other person, but I think it probably has its impact upon us. But a harsh word stirs up anger. So what do we need to do? We need to be very careful when we feel things escalating, that we want to de-escalate. We want to cool things off. And when we do, when we're in control, we're going to live a life that will abound to glory for God. We're going to live a life that will do more good for others, a life of honor and a life of blessing. Well, I hope you enjoy your discussion tonight. There's some things we need to get rid of. So we've got spring cleaning coming up at our houses, but we need some spring cleaning in our character. We need spring cleaning in our hearts and minds and souls. And let's get rid of all bitterness, and let's get rid of all wrath, and see if we don't find more joy and more blessings and happiness and peace and contentment and usefulness in God's service. Have a great discussion.
You came from heaven to earth to show the way, from the earth to the cross, my debt to pay. From the cross to the grave, from the grave to the sky, Lord, I lift your name on high.